Hello, my name is Dr. Jim Doty, and I'm the host of the Into the Magic Shop podcast, where we explore the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. Hi, Jim Doty here, host of the Into the Magic Shop podcast. My guest today is my good friend, the Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams, who many of you know is an ordained Zen priest, writer, activist, and the author of Being Black, Zen and the Art of Living with Fearlessness and Grace. She's also the co-author of Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation. She's been called the most vocal and most intriguing African-American Buddhist in America by the Library Journal. She's also the spiritual director of the meditation-based New Dharma community and founder of the Center for Transformative Change in Berkeley. She's also credited with developing what is called fearless meditation, fearless yoga, and warrior spirit training. Her given name in Buddhism, Kyodo, means way of teaching. I hope you enjoy our conversation today. I certainly did. And thank you all for listening. It's wonderful to have you here. Obviously, we're close friends for a long time, and it's really a joy to see you. One of the things I try always to do, though, is to understand people's backstory, because, of course, their backstory is what brings them to where we are today, typically, and that can be for good or bad. And it's interesting because a little bit earlier we were talking about my new book, Mind Magic. But one of the aspects that I mentioned in there was what is it that you're already manifesting? And of course, this is due to the baggage that all of us carry. But a lot of people go through life never examining that, and then they end up and going, I don't understand what's happened. I've been divorced 3 times. I married the same person, and they were horrible. Why is this happening to me? And because most people don't really sit back and go, so maybe you can tell us about your own background and how you ended up a Black woman becoming a Zen priest, which I know there may be one other one.
There's actually a good handful of us now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's not only priests, but teachers. So, yeah, moving on up.
Well, but I think that's also an interesting...
Or moving on out.
I think that's also actually another interesting narrative because... like so many things, as an example, when I went to med school, I mean, there was certainly a very, very small minority of minorities. And then as a neurosurgery resident, actually, there were almost none. There was one woman, I think, and thank goodness we've, of course, have seen that change over the last few decades. But what is your backstory that made you interested, if you will, in Zen Buddhism, but probably what began as a desire to be of service and to help others?
Yeah. I will pull a little thread, and so I was abused as a child, and that located me in a place of observation. So I learned for the sake of survival earliest, to observe people and to pay attention to the subtext that was going on beneath the things that were being said, the things that were being done. I needed to be particularly attentive to the incongruence between what people were saying and what they were doing. So that was a big orientation, something that situated me with an orientation of wanting to understand, I'm going to say reality, it's like, I want to know what's really going on here, because I realized very often, very early, very, very early, that there were multiple things at play. There were multiple levels of things going on. And that there is a kind of facade or projection or a way that people presented themselves, which I came to understand that also was out of their own sense of what they felt that they needed to project in order for them to survive, whatever that meant to them. And that made me very curious, and also helped me to kind of disappear when it was important to be able to move out of the line of, danger, out of the line of sight. It also made me very dexterous about how to organize myself so that I could understand what was going on for people, and how, and so I situated or organized myself so that people could make themselves more available so that I could understand more about them. And so I developed a lot of skills out of that. A lot of people can tell the story of, how terrible, things happen to them because of their abuse. And for me, it also helped me understand that I could transform anything that occurred, anything that happened in my life, to something that could be of benefit not only to myself but also to other people. Eventually, I came to realize that made me a little bit different.
Really? Well,
a little bit.
The sad part, I think, in these environments where children are abused is that oftentimes they feel somehow it's because of them. There's a defect in them, and that's why it happened. And of course, oftentimes the abuser will try to set that narrative that, well, you caused this, and which is a very unfortunate thing, because during these critical bonding periods, you get confused completely about love versus abuse, and this intertwining, and obviously it's horrible, because you meet people who've had these types of backgrounds, but there always has to be some negative aspect with it for them to actually then connect with the love part of it. And of course, that sets the stage for a lot of negative events in one's future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say that what was fortunate for me was that it was not my parents, and it was a babysitter, a person that my dad was dating, and so that gave me an out. It was brought to an end, and so then I had a different lens on, like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen, even though absolutely the person fomented the narrative that it was my fault, and every time something terrible befell me from their hands, it was my fault. It was because I didn't stop this or prevent that, right, or make this happen. So I had that, but then I also had a new perspective of, no one wanted to talk about it. So no one said anything to me about it. But I did get the lens of, like, oh, that actually shouldn't be that way. That's not how it's supposed to be. And no one's really making meaning of it. But I did get a sense of that shouldn't have happened. But I did, of course, carry that. And that actually threads to the story of how I came to really deepen in my Zen practice. Eventually, I understood that it made me a little bit different, that I didn't take reality at face value. I didn't take what I saw at face value. I was very curious about that. And, this is one of those things that feels like you tell this story a lot, but I'll tell it again.
Well,
one day.
Believe me, I have having been on a million podcasts, I'll tell you a funny story before you finish what you're going to say.
Yeah.
So Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, right? He would complain. Now, this may be an apocryphal story, but the story I heard is that he would complain because every time they went on stage, what everyone wanted to hear, which was Stairway to Heaven, right? And he was saying, I hated it. I just hated these damn people. They didn't want any of my new stuff. They didn't care about me. They just wanted to hear this goddamn song I have played a million times. I don't want to ever play it again. And then, though, he had a period of reflection and introspection, and what he realized was that it wasn't about him, right? And that the stories we tell, such as yours and mine and others, for a subset of people, that was a powerful narrative that meant something to them, that changed their lives. Yeah. And so he understood that finally and let it go. And I think, to your point, I've told the story many times, but for a lot of people, because so many people are suffering, so many people have had similar experiences, that it means something for somebody to come forward and to say, I went through this, I suffered, I survived, it is possible, and don't give up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have not actually shared the story about my abuse as part of the story, so you got something new, and that's because of our connection. But as I got older, I realized I thought I was like, wow, I'm really, I'm kind of really floating on a different plane here. I didn't seem to connect to a lot of the things that people thought I should connect to or seemed that other people should connect to. And one of them was art. Like, I just couldn't make sense of art. And long story short, I walked into this place and there was this big circle that wasn't quite closed. And it was like dynamic and alive. And for the first time, I was like, oh my goodness, that I feel something in that. And I looked down in the corner and it said Zen Circle. And I was like, Zen, I don't know what that is, but whatever it is. I went to these antiquated things that they call bookstores at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So I went to the bookstore and I looked for anything I could find about Zen. And I found a book, and it was called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, because
Suzuki.
beginner and Zen was in the same sentence. I was like, I'm a beginner. It has Zen. That's what I want to do. So yes, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, really incredible book. But here's the thing. It wasn't just that I found this book. I found the book. I'm so excited. I was like, somebody gets me. They understand the way I'm seeing the world. They're actually helping like deepen that and strengthen that and affirming that there is a different way to see life and to relate to life. And I was so excited, and I got a couple copies and I gave it to people, and they were like, I don't know what this means. I don't know what this is, like Greek. Like, I don't know. They were like, they're like, I know this is English, but I can't understand. And it really told me, James, that there was something, quite specific and unique about not only how I was seeing the world, but also the Dharma lens to seeing the world that didn't necessarily take with many people given the larger structures. So I was already, assessing that the worldview that we have and that we were being steeped in was actually inhibiting us from even being able to, to allow ourselves to see things in a different way. So there was like multiple levels happening of not just my seeing in a different way and not just getting the opportunity to see that other people do it, but also realizing that our society, our culture was shaping us in a way that was preventing us from seeing things more clearly and even wanting to see things more clearly, even wanting to see things more clearly. And so that was really, I think, what hooked me. It was that, it was one thing to get a new window, but it was another thing to feel like I had, and let's go to magic, it's sort of like I had found the magic, some kind of magic treasure trove that had a key to not just seeing things in a different way, but also helping me understand the ways in which I was continuously being shaped, formed, impacted by the society and the conditions around me to keep me from being able to see, from keeping me from wanting to see, that I was being distracted, I was being pulled, I was being led by the nose to doing anything else but being able to see myself and to actually understand myself. That was powerful for me.
Well, it's interesting. I think you mentioned that you became an observer, and I have to assume, that you were actually quite precocious, and this is why, instead of sort of just sitting with the abuse and sort of just accepting it and not reflecting on it, versus introspection, trying to process the different levels of what's really going on here, that takes a fair amount of insight and self-awareness, at least. And I think the problem was, and I can relate in some ways, is that these things are happening. You're living in this world. You're trying to process them and understand. None of it makes sense, yet there's this weird world going on around you. You don't even understand, why are these people doing these things? And then you find something, you go, oh my God, these people get it. Why can't everyone else see, if you want to use the term, the true nature of reality, which is illusion or delusion? And I think that's really true for some people, because, for myself, I went off when I was 11 or 12 or 13, studying Krishnamurti, Carlos Castaneda, and all these people. And it's like, I didn't have any friends who were doing that. So.
No, that's right. Yeah. And I just realized, literally for the first time, I realized that I bumped past one of the other major things that were occurring in this story, and I have to say, managed to drop it out all the time.
See, this is what talking to me does to you. You have to.
That's exactly right. So at 15, I went to find the person that had abused me.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to understand what was going on for you. What was that about? I had made clear for myself that it wasn't about me, but I wanted to understand what it was about for them. And so I went to find them. And what I came to understand was that they were suffering, that they had come up in a household that was incredibly abusive and masked, deeply masked behind religion, deeply masked behind, there was the presentation of someone that cared for children, for many children, actually, and too many children, and was in fact abusing those children, and that the person that abused me was drawn into a kind of shaping and programmed themselves, in effect, to understand expressions of care and love in these, warped ways that were obviously not actually about love. And that freed me up to not orient in the oppressor and the person that was
the victim,
just solely the person that was a perpetrator, right? And that solely the person that was the victim, but that we're in this kind of continuous loop of being shaped, and that if we and being altered, our natural state of intelligence and curiosity and wonder and connection and love is interrupted by these things that happen to us, these traumas that happen to us, these ways that, and if we didn't have a way to look at the world differently, that we would just, continue on. If something didn't, interrupt that. And for me, that really became, the study of Buddhism, of Zen in particular. I wasn't particularly religious about it. I was more philosophical because I was precocious and I was, doing this self-awareness and try to unpack it and try to understand it. But that had a lot to do with my sense of compassion and being, and really compassion, really, really instilled a deep sense of this person was suffering. This suffering came to me because this person was suffering. And if we just situate ourselves in the location of the person that did something and the person that had something done, then we'll just keep the story going. And I saw their suffering, and I saw the suffering that they were then furthering, on their children and the people around them, and that they were desperately trying to hide from it, actually. Now in this stage in their life, they were trying to hide from it, and they were in a lot of pain about the fact that they had created that kind of suffering and felt locked into it. So that really reoriented the way that I tried to unpack people and the harm that we cause and how we can interrupt it.
Well, that's what they always say: hurt people hurt other people unless it's resolved.
Yeah.
And sadly, that
absolutely.
is the case. So from that point, and you said you confronted this person at 15, how did this then, even though you, let's say, were reading Suzuki and others, how did this then, I assume you also read Alan Watts at some point?
At some point, yes.
That's a whole different story we could go into.
Yeah, we had to, exactly.
So from 15, though, to becoming a Zen priest, what happened there, and what was that path or trajectory? And were there other influences, or once you got on that track, you was pretty direct, or did you make a few detours like many of us do?
Yeah, I was actually with that person. I was, brought up in different iterations of Christian church, Baptist, Episcopalian, Catholic, little touches of Catholicism. But Buddhism in general, as I said, it kind of peeled something back. I think I'm inclined to be I'm a non-believer. You know what I mean? I'm like I don't know if I buy this. So the Buddha really appealed to me. It was like, don't believe anything until you've tasted it, touched it, proved it to yourself. So that really, appealed to me, that level of permission giving to be in my own curiosity. The detours for me were actually along the lines of Dharmic traditions in general. So I think I was across the board curious about Shambhala Buddhism, insight meditation. I was curious about Advaita, so a lot of the non-dualist, I think that's what really got me. That's the path that I got onto and, has me hooked. In many ways, though I'm formally a Zen priest, I'm formally a teacher. I have what's considered the highest quote unquote rank or honorific title. Think of myself, rather post-Zen, and, it's just like doing this life thing. With far less interest in titles or framing it or orienting and really situating myself in what does it mean to return to ourselves, and because I don't think that there's any kind of nation building around any particular institution belief. They can get corrupted so easily and so readily by other people's pain and what they bring to it with their titles, with their with all of the kudos that they have. Hurt people can hurt people, and I've seen it in Zen, I've seen it in Christianity, I've seen it in Shambhala, I've seen it in all across of the many different traditions. I've seen it in Advaita. We see it in Sikh tradition. Beloved Sikh teacher. So I feel like I'm off the just like we don't need Messiah other than how we organize ourselves around how are we being in the world. What is the truth of our own being? How do we understand ourselves and root ourselves in a belonging that is anchored in unfolding one's own truth and how you understand that? And I think that what we share across the board in all of the traditions and all the religions at the very core, before they get sanctified and religious and made so religious,
dogmatized,
all of the things.
Right.
I think that they're all trying to point us back to, one could say the divinity in ourselves. I just say that, our own truth. And that because the essential nature of humanity is to be connected, to be caring, to be compassionate, that core thing actually will steer us, will keep us upright. We'll wobble, we'll figure it out. We'll do a little bit of this, go a little bit of that direction. But when we find that core essence of ourselves, that I think that I call it our own belonging, right? Like a belonging to ourselves is kind of like honoring like who and how we are in the world, dropping the need for the external gratification and the external, approval that drives so much of this culture. That there is something that is innate to every single one of us that allows us to not have, a manual, Dharma helps, teachers help, sutras help, all of those things help, but that we come with original instructions to be connected to each other. We come with that.
Well, it's funny you say that, because you could look at it one of two ways. The one way is we're perfect at birth, and then we get contaminated in life.
That's right.
Or you could say that we learn these behaviors and we realize that they're not beneficial, and how do we transcend that or self-actualize, or whatever the term is. It's interesting because we're talking about dogma and the nature of many religions. I'm sure, obviously, you know Karen Armstrong, and she won the TED Prize, but she ended up speaking with 19, I think, spiritual or religious leaders. And again, not surprisingly, at the core of essentially everyone is what? Compassion and the golden rule. And what I always say is, over thousands of years, experientially, we have learned certain truths that nowadays have been validated by science, neuroscience, because how we evolved as a species, because our offspring don't run off into the forest or the jungle, and they required to be cared for well over a decade. We have a genetic imperative to care.
Yeah.
And as a result of that evolution, we are rewarded when we care through the release of oxytocin. And in fact, our physiology, both our brain and our peripheral physiology, also have evolved to work their best when we care. And thus, why? Unfortunately, our sympathetic nervous system, which evolved to respond to threat, which was supposed to rarely happen, if you will, on the savannah in Africa. Unfortunately, the nature of how we've evolved modern society is that because you don't have family, friends, relatives, you're not living in intergenerational groups, you don't have villages where you grow up or where you're born, where you die, this has completely altered the way we should be. So people are constantly in fear of being judged or not being accepted. And of course, all of our goal is to be accepted by a group. And as we see in modern day politics, that can either be manipulated for good or bad.
Yeah.
And sadly, in many cases, it's for the bad. And sadly, insecure people or fearful people will sign on to be in a group of people to be accepted.
Yeah.
And it is very, very sad. So I know you did this thing on belonging.
You did.
Did you have any other insights or thoughts you wanted to share about that? Or how, in some ways, I was just talking about how modern society separates us, but how do we overcome that? How do we belong? And of course, you know, I may have my view, but I think it probably aligns with your view as well. But how does somebody live in the modern world and belong or connect or be present, if you will?
You know, I've done a lot of, you know, in the years that I have consideration of that. And I'll start with saying that we tend to go to binary. So almost anything I say, people will, you know, throw up some binary, you know, the opposite thing.
Well, this is like you say something about, you know, potentially a presidential candidate, and the first thing out of their mouth is, but you know, so-and-so, he did this and he was worse.
That's exactly right.
It's
like, yeah, it's like,
they're not even listening to you.
Right.
It's like they have their, you know.
Yeah. So I have organized this, and this is just the language, and people can use whatever language. So I encourage people, like, when you hear something, rather than get stuck on the words, you know, and kind of, you know, parse out the words, you know, feel into the essence of what I'm suggesting here. I am suggesting that one of the things to unhook ourselves, and we're not on the we're not in the Sahara, right, in the African desert, within an intergenerational, you know, family where we're born and where we die and where our belonging is a given. So that's not where we are, and we're also not in societies that I want to say historically, which is it's also been being corrupted now, but societies that are collective by nature. They're communal and more collective by nature, and more Eastern societies have historically, that is changing rapidly, been communal. I'm talking about in what modern Western hyper-individualistic society. I think that the antidote, if you will, is to develop a secure attachment with oneself. One could say it that way. I call it own belonging, our own belonging, a careful, methodical, persistent returning to first developing the capacity and then strengthening that capacity of returning to ourselves to feel into what feels true and right for us within ourselves. Because when we do that, we can start. It's like we become a tuning fork for and where we can tune out the noise of the external approval that drives us. This does not mean that we don't want or need care and connection within groups and families and so on, but rather that within that we still need to parse out their muckety muck, right? That they're often bringing, because not because they're to blame or terrible, because we're bringing stuff and we have like these histories and a lot of shaping and a lot of way that the society is organized to have our nervous system just on blast all the time. And so the way that I speak about it is I actually developed an approach to, I call it like an unmeditation or a meditation praxis rather than a practice, because it's changing us as we do it. That we, whatever you want to call it, that you have something that allows you to get still enough to feel yourself and quiet enough to hear yourself, right? Both of those two things at the intersection of that. Still enough to feel yourself. So people are like, I can't stay still. I'm like, I don't care if you can stay, quote unquote, still, rock still. I'm saying still enough to feel yourself. So whatever that means. If you feel yourself when you're running, great. You feel yourself when you're in the shower, great. Whatever. So let's not get into the semantics and get tripped out by the words. Still enough, that's your own measure to feel yourself. And by your own measure, quiet enough to hear yourself. This allows us to become a tuning fork to what this physiology, this convergence of experience, realities, traumas, pains, joys, you become a tuning fork for yourself that is now not externally referenced. I think that is absolutely essential.
I think, of course, one of the challenges that people avoid feeling themselves because there's so much pain associated with it, that they want to use the distractions of modern society so they don't have to feel. And I think that's sadly one of the challenges. Or I always use the analogy, if you're a goldfish in a swimming in dirty water, well, you have no idea what clean water's like, right? And so somebody can perhaps tell you what that's like, but that's hard to really experience or appreciate. So I think something that, if you will, shakes your world, whatever that is, to sort of get your attention and then makes you understand, that can be extraordinarily powerful and transformative and transcendent. It's just, it's not like that happens all the time for many people. And I think the other side, of course, is, as you know, this sort of trope that we frequently use, which is, the teacher appears when the student's ready.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that, I want to say that it's been my experience that we've got to have something, this is my imagination. This is not my experience. I imagine that we have to have something that calls forth the rebalance. And if it's always going to be like, losing $30 million, we're in trouble. It means that the ground has to come out from beneath us every single time for us to start to right ourselves. I don't think that nature, I don't think that whatever the intelligence is in nature would allow that to be the case. That the only way that we can set ourselves right again is to have the ground completely come out from beneath us, as at least as far as we understand. So I think that there's something that you have, that I have, right? That sparks an interest. That sparks it's not just an interest. It's like a kind of magnet of wait a minute, wait. And if you can kind of toggle, right, where there's just enough of a sense of the relief from the constancy of the barrage of things that are overwhelming us, that becomes just interesting enough. That's why I call it a praxis, right? It's it's just interesting enough to get us through the discomfort of the micro discomfort of like, oh yes, stuff comes up. So these things that we have that are sit down for 20 minutes and meditate. Yeah, good luck with that. Right, good luck with that. Right? People are just like, I can't even make 20 minutes, much less sit down for 20 minutes.
Well, of course, then there's that saying: if you can't meditate for an hour, that means you need to meditate or for 20 minutes. You need to meditate for an hour.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But I think that is true. I would, though, make the following comment.
Yeah.
So the power you and I have are to illuminate or inspire people of something that they probably feel in their hearts that sits there. They don't know how to take it to the next level to go forward. And I agree with you in terms of meditation. It's that word for many people is very intimidating, because they have this view of a Buddhist monk in robes with their legs crossed and all that. And, when you're able to sort of make them understand what this meditation or reflection is, it doesn't have to be that way at all, and get them to relax, they can get into that space. But, I will tell you, there's a subset of people, and literally who've said to me, they go, I don't understand why you waste your time doing this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
And it's always sort of fascinating. And typically these are people who very much are into, again, the societal definitions of success: money, power, position. And it's impossible for them to see anything beyond that, because their definitions are so wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
But I think in some ways it also has to do with your ability to self-reflect.
Yes.
And there are many people who don't want to self-reflect. And while you can just look at them and tell they're very unhappy, and you can see their actions, which underneath you can tell are from a fear narrative.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's very hard to break through that. And so when you say, does it take a catastrophic event or something so profound, it's sort of like, the heroin addict ending up in the gutter,
yeah,
and laying there looking up and finally gets it. I think it would be great if we could not have to wake up in the gutter, but I think there's a fair number of people who have to end up there before that change happens, versus there's some others who, they'll say, well, I went to see my mother and she burst into tears and I realized I had done enough.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think, it can go all sorts of different ways. But the key is, of course, doing the best you can to touch people, to make them see, if you will, the true nature of reality, which is this idea of oneness or interconnection or interdependence. And I was going to say, I've had the pleasure of meeting so many spiritual and religious leaders, going from, of course, Pope Francis to Archbishop Tutu to Thich Nhat Hanh to Amma, the hugging saint, and Eckhart Tolle, et cetera, et cetera. And I am always elevated from being with these people, but they're not attached to their dogma. I think they recognize the dogma is very helpful for a subset of people, but they do have this energy that they give off of unconditional love and acceptance. And I think this has to do with, to overcome a lot of these, I think the baggage we have, we also have to become friends with our shadow self, right? And this part of us that so many people try to push away. And I think that's also one of the issues.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think that's my, at least my imagination, that's certainly part of my story, is to have been able to, through the routes that I found, to shed the story of what happened to me and the things that were happening to me were my fault, and that I needed to carry that into the rest of my life, and bear the burden of that, and and all of the shady stuff and the shadowy stuff that goes with that, of looking over your shoulder and expecting that people are seeing you in a particular way that reinforces those narratives and the ideas of how you are in the world. I am. Maybe I was thinking for a moment, I was like, well, maybe the people that really need, the ground to come up and from beneath them, or they need to lay in the gutter, maybe that's what we call karma. I'm prepared to hold that. Every single one of us has something in us. Of course, there are things that are obstacles to it that get in the way of it, and all the shaping and the worldview and so on. But I'm prepared that the taste, if you will, of feeling free in oneself, and not the sense of like there's something out there that's going to make me, is very potent. And I don't think that everybody gets to it. And I think that when people get the idea of it, that it's hard to shake. That it's hard to shake the idea of being told that actually you're not driving your own life at all. Like, actually, you're driven by fear. Actually, you look unhappy, and you don't know who you are, and that's a compelling thing for. I think I like to think that the universe has human beings with self-consciousness, so that the universe gets to see itself. So there's something in us that wants to see ourselves, and wants to know ourselves. And so there's something very, very deep and innate that when we realize that actually we are not the driver of this show, that something else is driving us, that quest for, like, the desire for freedom, the desire that is currently being driven by grabbing stuff, more territory, more things, more titles, more money, more women, more drugs, more, whatever, all of the, the feeling, or numbing out, just numbing out. But that it's still the same quest that we're trying to like be in command of ourselves. And then when we realize that that's not what's happening, something breaks for us. Something goes sideways, and I think I think that we have to have that, because otherwise we'd just be a mess. So if there's something, if you have some science that says no, that's not true, just let me stay in my fantasy.
I would suggest
that we want to be free.
Yes, but I would suggest we are a mess.
We are a mess.
And I think the other challenge is, which we've sort of alluded to earlier, is, unfortunately, the nature of human beings is that we have an ego, and oftentimes that ego then results in manipulation and a desire to control and to take over, which then, of course, as we see even in our political process, these types of people surround themselves with yes people, which further builds their ego. And then they believe, and I think this is also on some level the nature of addiction, having been addicted to various and sundry things myself. We don't have to go into any of that. But anyway, because, you create this narrative that, well, I'm special and I deserve this and people don't understand me. And because I need this and I have to have it, and it's not my problem. They suffer because they suffer, but I deserve this. And it's really a horrible sort of path to be on, because you're blind to everything. And so I think you're right. It's, how do you open people's eyes to see? Because the driver of those behaviors, or that belief in and of itself, is fear and insecurity. And so how do you sort of overcome that? Because you keep telling yourself, well, no, I'm okay, I'm fine, but I deserve, which further fuels this insecurity. So
what's your intervention?
Yeah. What is my intervention?
Yeah, what's your intervention?
Trying to look, works both ways. It's to look at others and see myself, which put you in the mind frame of understanding how your actions can make others suffer.
Yeah.
And then that sort of comes back to you in a sense of wanting to care for the other.
Yeah.
But when you put in that sort of way, it ends up that you're actually caring for yourself.
Yeah.
And it, I think, also promotes this narrative of oneness. And so that's sort of where I go. But I'm a frail, flawed human being who has repeatedly made mistakes. And that's the way it is. It's always interesting, though, to meet people who have this arrogance or this ego about them, who try to project that they're okay. And it's so sad because it's such a thin veneer sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, we are getting to be in the experience of that at such a high levels of, our society,
Our public discourse.
public and yes, public and political. I guess my question is, what is your imagination? How do you see, or what does the neuroscience for you say about what we do? Those of us that have a sense of, we can do something better here. We can be better. What do we do? I don't mean like how do we do ourselves better. I think that each of us are on our own path, but how do we relate? Within a society that are driven by these kinds of false structures.
Well, of course, the worst thing you can do is to tell somebody they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And we have confirmation bias,
Mm-hmm.
and people absorb things that conveniently match the narrative they're projecting. I think that I think Martin Luther made a quote. You can. I'm going to screw it up, but Martin Luther King. But it related to you can't destroy hate with hate,
Mm-hmm.
right? You
Yeah.
have to look through the lens of love, and it's only through love that those narratives can change. And I think what has to happen is you have to put yourself in the other person's position, and this is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily you agree with it, but you have to be able to sit and understand how did that person get to that place
Mm-hmm.
in a non-judgmental way, simply to listen. And this is, of course, one of the problems in our public discourse is invariably if somebody says something, they'll either say, well, no, but, or, and they'll go on. The reality is, I think, most people just want to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And if you give a platform where you truly empathically listen, which, of course, Thich Nhat Hanh was very much a promoter of, the very nature of that release, so they can sit there and tell you the pain that they have from the situation they're in and how it drove them to do X, Y, or Z, then I think when you approach that with listening and understanding, that opens a path. We can now have a two-way discussion versus a one-sided discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really, really important. But it's very hard, of course,
Mhm.
because, all of our egos can get involved, and you have to be very careful about things. So that's why I generally, don't post cartoons or written negative narratives about people,
Good.
although I have, unfortunately, sometimes. But because it doesn't help things. Once somebody gets confronted or antagonized, there's no more communication.
Mhm.
And it's funny, I refer oftentimes to I don't know if you've seen it, there was a Heineken beer commercial. And it was quite fascinating. You probably didn't see it, obviously, since you're not at the bar drinking Heineken.
Not lately.
But the point was they brought a bunch of people together nominally to work on some sort of a project, like a community project. but it had cameras around, but it showed the interaction over time of these people from clearly far divergent views. But over a few days, they all came together because, of course, the reality is our commonality or our common interests far, far exceed those things that separate us. So also, there's a tendency to, when you meet somebody who you feel has a divergent view, you create a narrative of them which is not true. It strips them of their humanity. And in some ways, it's like objectification of somebody versus understanding them. And once you're able to connect with someone's humanity, that opens the path, a two-way path for love and acceptance. But until you do that, you're both looking through the lens of this is a person I don't like because of X, not this is a person I like because 99% of my goals or aspirations or what I want in life, actually this person has. And I think if you can reflect on that and be patient and simply listen to someone's story, I think you're much, much more sympathetic and interested. And I always tell people, everybody has an incredible, fascinating story if you just listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
So when is a new book coming out? That's what I want to know. I want to be the first one to say, I announced that this book is coming out. So is there a new book in progress?
There is a new book in progress. How
See,
did you know?
I knew it. I know these things.
How did you know? Yeah. I don't have a publication date. I'm still shopping the book and just poking around, but I've got my chapter. I know what it is. It's the chapters, outlines are done and all of that good stuff. But the book is called Point, and it is about this kind of like a new take, if you will, on getting still enough to feel yourself and quiet enough to hear yourself, of course. And the premise is most of, and you skirted across it as you said something. When people hear the word meditation, they think people in robes, monks in robes, and the truth is that most of from the Eastern perspective, for sure, most of the meditation instructions that we've received were actually developed for monks. They were developed for monastics. They would develop not only for monastics, and for monks, but they would develop for the conditions of monasticism. They would develop for the conditions of being in an environment in which you have a significantly reduced load of making choices for day to day, what time you wake up, what do you eat, what you wear, when you go to sleep, what the activities of the day are. And so my take is I was like, yeah, that's actually not the conditions that those of us who are living in the world are living in. And it's not that that's not beneficial, but having been a teacher for, I have a practice for over 35 years now and been a teacher for, few decades. I was just struck by how many times people would say, okay, Rev, but, how do I take this in my life? And I was like, well, what are you doing this for if you're not taking it in your life? And I realized that we have a split. So we bifurcate between our retreat time, even if we, go to meditation, we go to retreats, we go to day-longs and so on, but it's so dramatically different from the life conditions that we live in. And most of us are not like, okay, like I'm having like a stressful time, but I'm going to go sit down and, take 40 minutes. I'm going to go sit in meditation. And so it does not feel like a clear way to continue to, and I want to say this word again, to have the theory of the value of meditation meet the, rubber on the road, right?
Exactly.
And so the theory and the practice are not matching up. And I'm like, no, we need a praxis where the theory of what we're doing is actually showing up in the practice, and that is actually dynamically shifting things for us. And so Point is this approach, and it is about coming back to a singular point. And what's important is not staying. In fact, we say don't stay. It's not about staying. It's not about like staying. It's not about holding to your breath. It's not about holding on. It's actually just about returning. And so the entire thing is about you're choosing a point. I choose a particular point that's sort of like physiologically beneficial and has a lot of juju, if you will, for giving people insight into the workings of the body, not the mind, right? Not the mind, which is not that you don't understand the mind, but the focus is not the mind, which the mind kind of gets itself caught up and starts looping on top of looping, and we can actually bifurcate our own attention and think we're meditating while we're kind of like something else is going on, and part of us is going, yeah, I'm meditating, right? Because the mind is, complex and it's tricky. So this is more about an embodiment, right? It's kind of like a more somatic practice. It's more about like insight, like an awareness of that is about really what's going on for us as a mind, body. I like to say our head, heart, gut, and groin, like, the whole thing, like what's going on all up and down this.
You sound like the chakras.
Yeah, it's like that. But
yes.
but we're not trying to meditate or like, it's not insight. We're not trying to gain insight. We're just coming back. We're just learning to come back. You get caught out here, come back. You find yourself lost someplace, come back. You find yourself outside of yourself in some kind of way where you're lost, you're caught up, you're confused, you're overstressed, you just come back. The moment you notice, you come back. And before you notice, you know what? It doesn't matter. Don't trip yourself out. So it's kind of like an easier course, because we don't trip ourselves out and then get add new stress by like, oh, I didn't do it right. And now we're judging ourselves and we're not good meditators. And I'm just like, listen.
I've only heard that a million times, right?
Right. It's and so I just think, here's my thing, James. If we get 5 more completely awake human beings, I don't know that that's going to do anything for humanity. I want millions of more adulting human beings. I want millions more present human beings. I want millions more people that can say, you know what, I screwed that up. I see it. I'm coming back. That's what I want happening in the world.
Yeah, I think what happens sometimes, though, is that people make it too hard.
That's right.
And what I mean by that is there's a tendency among humans not to be at the present moment, but to project a future they want to see, which is, I want to be able to sit and meditate and be there and to have all that. And they get lost in that image versus understanding that it's, in some ways, it's like an athlete. You don't start out as a ultra marathon runner. You start out with simplicity, simply getting up and going for a short walk.
Yep.
And it's a process, but it's a process, if you will, of becoming comfortable with yourself.
Yeah.
And there is no stress associated with it. You're just there and you're present. And I think that's really one of the issues, is because so many people get afraid, again, of being judged.
Yeah.
That, well, I'm not doing that meditation right, or I'm afraid I'll go here and there'll be this group of people and they're going to look at me and know that I'm not breathing the right way.
That's right.
And, my perspective is I just don't give a fuck.
That's right. And that's exactly it. It's kind of did you come back? Yeah, that's it. You're done. You won. That's it.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of you get a little dopamine hit, like I came back. And when I didn't come back, I don't even know that I didn't come back, so it doesn't matter. And we kind of short-circuiting exactly that, right? The performance, the anxiety about performance, the projection into the future. You've got one move. That's it. You find once you notice, you come on back, and you don't have to stay. You're not trying to hold yourself, tighten yourself. You're not kind of trying to become someone. You're just becoming who you are.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, is how do you become who you are, which is to be present. And that's the biggest challenge, because so many people are either trapped in the what if or what will be versus what is right now.
That's exactly right.
I think that's right.
And you know what happened? Because of the pandemic, I developed this a long time ago, but because of the pandemic, we had a group, and I was like, well, what are we doing? We're all on lockdown. I started with a little group. We called it the No Big Deal Sit, because I was like, it's no big deal. Exactly that, right? It's like, I don't give a fuck. It's just no big deal, right? And it's 4 years now. And what we've seen with people doing this praxis, it's super light as it is. When people get that little bit of taste, that's why I said that before. And they're like, oh yeah. that thing that we're often trying to run in future pace to, it comes naturally, right? They develop the strength, they develop the stability, they develop the clarity, they develop the sense of like compassion for themselves in this process and unfolding. And because we have an open space where they actually share, and no unfettered, no intervening, they get heard.
Yeah,
they develop compassion for each other. They hear things that usually we would hear and we're in quote unquote dialogue and we'd have something to say. But now they're just being with it and they're sitting with it and they're like, oh yeah, that's me too. I see that, I get that. So it's been actually rather phenomenal. And, I would say that having, been with people in formal practice for years, I see such an uptick in efficacy because people are not trying to get somewhere. They're just coming back to themselves, and it's had an incredible impact, and that's why I'm writing about it. As weird as it seems to write a long book about something that has such simple instructions.
Well, that's funny you say that, but that is the case sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, I think on that note, actually, we covered a lot of territory, and I think that brings us to the end of our conversation. So thank you so much for being with me, and it was nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Again, thank you for being with us today. The Into the Magic Shop podcast can be found where you find your most popular podcasts, or you can find us at intothemagicshop.com.